answer.
Thank you very much. Sarah Coates, our correspondent in Tel Aviv in Israel, just giving us a sense, an initial sense of how the news of the verdict of the ICJ has. Let me bring in Professor Angelo Dube, who's been with us for some time now. Thank you very much for staying on. Now, the court, among other things, in terms of its ruling, said that Israel must take steps to prevent acts of genocide in Gaza, but stop short of ordering a ceasefire. Are there implications here for the long-term application? Because the application around genocide is still to be heard. Yes. This was just for provisional measures.
Yes. Look, the court, although we did not necessarily get the request or the prayer that we made for the ceasefire, still was able to give or to issue an order for Israel to, number one, take into account its obligations under international customary law and under the convention itself to ensure that genocide is prevented. This means no acts of genocide are committed. Israel must ensure that that doesn't happen. Number two, the incitement to commit genocide. So the carte blanche that Israeli authorities have had to go around calling Palestinians human animals must come to an end, because that would be incitement to commit genocide. But what I think we can take away from this case today, from the judgment today on the provisional measures, was that if you grew up listening to folk tales, you will recall the story of the boy who cried wolf. Israel has been crying anti-Semite, anti-Semite. Each time they're accused, each time they're thrown to the letter of the law, that you're violating the law, you'd be accused of being anti-Semitic. Today, the court vindicated all of us who stood up and said Israel is wrong here. Israel is violating the law here.
Yeah, in fact, talking about that kind of reaction, we heard from Sarah Coates now, saying the Israeli National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, mocking the ICJ earlier and accusing it of being anti-Semitic. So they haven't even stopped, even while they still, obviously, one imagines, have to study the verdict properly before they issue that official statement that the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the world must wait for.
It's all about playing this, I'll call it the Semite card. As every time you're accused of anything, this is anti-Semite. Before you even sit down and see what the court said, where your shortcomings and how can you resolve them.
Yeah, Palestine has welcomed this order, calling it significant. We saw the Deputy Foreign Minister of Palestine earlier next to Dr. Naledi Pandor outside The Hague. I mean, the standing of South Africa in terms of international law, and it has shown that it understands the Genocide Convention in this case. Going forward, what are the implications?
It's a pity that international law takes place within the ambit of international relations. States are, motivated by the national interest in whatever they do. There are states that are going to use international relations to get back to South Africa for what it did, because remember...
So there could be some aftermath?
There could be some aftermath.
Diplomatically? Diplomatically,
yes. Yeah, because remember, a genocide of this nature serves two purposes. It has political currency, it has economic currency. It might make economic sense to the state that's occasioning the genocide, or it might make political sense. Maybe it grounds the regime in terms of legitimacy. It finds reason for existence. So it will want to push back for its legitimacy being threatened.
So South Africa should expect some kind of backlash from some countries. I mean, Belgium made a statement a few days ago saying they will support the ICJ verdict in this South Africa case, even if it's in favor of South Africa. But some European Union members are not so sure. There's division.
It is the global south, global north divide. It's exciting to see the likes of Belgium. Perhaps they're also trying to atone for their past sins for what they did in the Congo. But you look at Germany throwing its weight behind Israel, and you realize they want to continue what they did in Namibia, the genocide in Namibia. So it's a mixture of reactions from different states, informed, of course, by their own past behaviors.
Yeah, Prof Dube, you are the expert here. The ruling has been described as an important reminder that no state is above the law or beyond the reach of justice. Now, in a multilateral world where the United Nations system has been criticized, for example, African countries like South Africa, like Zimbabwe and other countries have been calling for reforms of the United Nations Security Council. I'm bringing it in because the ICJ's rulings always go to the Security Council to say what to do. But going forward, how significant is this reminder that no state is above the law?
Number one, it adds to the growing, solidification of the rights that have been claimed as part of customary international law, so that no state can in the future say, I'm not a party to this convention, therefore you can't touch me. We can then point them towards customary international law to say, it forms part of customary international law, therefore you are bound. The architecture of the UN is where the weakness of the international human rights system and the international criminal law system lies. Because the Permanent Five gave themselves, the rights to actually veto anything that is proposed. We know that Israel is the blue-eyed poster boy of the West. They will always defend. That is why they've been arming them. That is why they've been engaging in rhetoric and propaganda to try and make Israel look like it has a case when it doesn't have a case. So we will see that playing itself out at the UN level as well.
Yeah, so from an international law perspective, broadly speaking, is this a very important win, so to speak, for the global South or for a state? Because many people thought South Africa was punching way above its weight.
I understand the mentality of people who would think like that, because they think South Africa is a footnote because it comes from the global South. States are sovereign and they're equal. South Africa is not different from the US. Economically, they may be different, but as far as they're concerned, in terms of their statehood, they're both states, they're sovereign and they're equal. South Africa did not punch be above its weight. South Africa simply defended humanity. South Africa did not go there because it had a South African interest. It had the interest of humankind, because this shocks the conscience of humankind.
Yeah, we just want to show our viewers some of the key points of the verdict. We're going to bring up the graphic now so we can just take it through. Maybe there's one or two you might want to speak to, Professor. We're going to have a look and see what are the key things that come out of this ruling by the ICJ. Although it did not give an immediate ceasefire in terms of the application by South Africa, it really said Israel must take all measures to prevent genocide, as you've said, yes, which is an important thing. That's in terms of the Genocide Convention. Israel must report to ICJ within 1 month in terms of implementation measures. That's very important.
The reporting is important because it allows the court to monitor its own orders to see if there's compliance.
Yeah, and Israel must prevent, as you said, and punish genocidal incitement. I've seen some comments by Israeli officials, no, we have a right to defend ourselves. Yes, but you don't have to commit genocide.
Yes. Self-defense does not necessarily embody a genocide. You can defend yourself without being genocidal.
Yeah, and then they said must prevent the destruction of evidence. That will be on the ground?
It's very critical, because the fear from South Africa was that we are not there. Israel will kill witnesses, Israel will wipe out documents, and there will be nothing to present when the time comes for merits to be presented. So they must preserve and perhaps curate whatever evidence.
Because the genocide case is a long-term one. It's still going to go. This was just for provisional measures. Now, allowing humanitarian aid into Gaza is important. I mean, Sarah Coates, our correspondent, pointing out that today it's very stormy in the area, and we know that there's 1.something million people in Gaza. Many of whom have no homes now. They sleep in the streets. So it's important that humanitarian aid and assistance is given to people. I saw a report, or I heard a report the other time, that they don't even have medicines. People are using raw salt to apply on their wounds because the Israelis are not allowing humanitarian aid to go through. And then the last one there we have, in terms of those key measures, must take more measures to protect Palestinians. So short of a ceasefire, prevent genocide,
yes,
and do not make sure that you punish anybody who wants to incite it. And thirdly, make sure that you protect the Palestinians.
Indeed. These are welcome measures. The court does not necessarily have to grant measures as prayed for directly, word for word, for what, I mean, in terms of what South Africa prayed for. They can craft, as they did, their own measures, which are identical to what South Africa asked for, except, save for the ceasefire one.
So will Israel be required to show in 30 days' time, in a month's time, as the court ordered, to present a report about the implementation? Will they have to show what they've done or they are doing or plan to do about these?
Two things that they'll have to show: what they've done, because from now until a month, they ought to be on the ground doing it.
So you start now?
Yes.
Okay.
And number two, what they are continuing to do to remedy the situation, to lessen human suffering, and to ensure compliance with the Genocide Convention. But interestingly, the duty to prevent and punish, particularly the duty to punish, although the court issued that as a provisional measure against Israel, it is the right of every state in the world to utilize universal jurisdiction to punish any perpetrator of the genocide who dares set foot in South Africa.
Yeah, let's not also forget the release of hostages. I think Judge Donahue making a point to say the court says it's unacceptable that you've got innocent civilians as hostages. As part of the way forward, both sides must release no matter how many hostages they are holding.
There was a welcome provisional measure from the court to say, in good faith, release what you have so that we move forward without any violations of, the international legal system. Because these are not prisoners of war because of the classification of the conflict in Gaza.
Yeah. Now, one of the big issues here, I'm just asking you from your perspective and understanding, you made an important point that international law takes place within international relations. So it's in that ambit that states do. We have a problem with the United Nations system. We have a problem with the Security Council. And South Africa has been really pushing for a permanent seat for Africa at the Security Council at the United Nations. I think the seat is rotational among different states. Currently, I think Mozambique is there until next year. What does this mean for those efforts by South Africa for a permanent seat for Africa at the United Nations Security Council in the aftermath of this verdict?
Legally speaking, I think it only underscores the calls for reform that have been there to say we need to be equal players. If states are equal and they're all sovereign, we cannot have simply 5 states from the global north determining the fate of the world. Because, I mean, they might have been the strongest and the most suited to do that in the 1945s. We were still colonies in Africa. We were still under colonial rule. We didn't have a voice. But now we're no longer like that. We've regained our independence. We're no longer colonies. We are states that are equally participating in the international law fabric, and we need to be heard. Our voices must be heard. We must be represented. There must be reforms at the UN level. We must have a permanent representation. And South Africa has demonstrated that it is qualified and to stand as a permanent member of the so-called P. I don't know whether it will be a P5 or a P7, whatever P it's going to be.
So the time is right now, the opportunity is ripe now for that permanent seat to be granted to an African country.
I think South Africa has demonstrated its readiness for that it took this matter as an agent of humankind and pushed the way it pushed when everyone else was calling it an agent of terrorism.
Yeah, you've mentioned a few things which make me ask you this. I know you're not, you're a lawyer, but I need to ask you this. From a human solidarity perspective, I had a comment being made by one of the earlier experts around Ubuntu. And even Ronald Ramula, the Minister of Justice, when South Africa presented its case, speaking to the media in The Hague afterwards, he also used the term Ubuntu. So South Africa saying, we have lived through apartheid. We know what human solidarity is all about. And the Palestinians welcoming this in the way that they've done, that they'll be forever indebted to South Africa. How critical is it from a multilateral perspective that solidarity also makes room or is present?
Solidarity is important. I must lament the fact that the court did not address or incorporate or infuse principles of Ubuntu in its judgment, because that would have been a decolonial stance by the court to say they are now looking at legal principles not just from the global west but also from the global south. Because remember, when the ICJ was created, when the statute was created, when they looked at the sources of law, they referred to the principles or the belief systems of what they call civilized nations. Now, that would be the West. For them to, if they had incorporated Ubuntu, which is a value under our constitutional jurisprudence in South Africa, it would have shown that the international system is now open to decoloniality, as it were, and the inclusion of Africa as an equal player.
Clearly, there's more to come out of this, from what you've said, and hopefully the world will be coming, from a multilateral perspective, to be more inclusive.
Yes.
May use that term. Thank you very much, Professor Angelo Dube, Professor of Law. He's an acting director at